When banks failed in 1929, when factories shut their gates, when paper money lost its meaning almost overnight, two groups in America barely noticed. The Amish and the isolated mountain communities of Appalachia kept eating, kept building, kept surviving, not because they had savings accounts, not because they had stockpiles of gold, because they had something the rest of the country had forgotten how to use: each other. Today we're breaking down the real documented barter systems these communities relied on for generations, systems historians and folklife researchers have recorded in detail. This isn't folklore dressed up for a video. This is how people actually got through a cashless economy. In this expanded exploration, we will dive deep into the mechanics of survival, looking at the historical roots, the grueling reality of these practices during the Great Depression, and the timeless lessons they offer for an uncertain future. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. Let's get started. Rule 1. Labor is the real currency and it never loses value. In Amish communities, the barn raising is the most famous example, and it's completely real. When a family needed a barn, a house, or a structure rebuilt after a fire, the entire community would show up, sometimes over 100 people, and complete the job in a single day. No one was paid in dollars. The payment was reciprocity. You helped build my barn this spring, I help build yours next fall, or I help you bring in your harvest, or I sit with your children when you're sick. Sociologists who study Amish life, including Donald Craybill, one of the most cited scholars on Amish culture, have documented this as a core survival mechanism. It doesn't collapse when the stock market does because it was never tied to the stock market in the first place. Labor doesn't inflate. A day of work is a day of work, whether the dollar is worth something or worth nothing. Historical context. During the early 20th century, this wasn't just about barns. It was about changing works. If a neighbor was sick during the planting season, the community didn't send a get-well card. They sent a team of horses and 3 men to ensure that neighbor's family wouldn't starve next winter. In the hardscrabble hills of Kentucky and West Virginia, labor exchange was the lifeblood of the logging and coal mining camps when the company script ran dry. Families would trade a day of grubbing, clearing land, for a day of logging. Modern application: the lesson here is the time bank concept. In a modern setting, this looks like a professional designer trading 4 hours of branding work for 4 hours of plumbing repair. It bypasses the tax and inflation hurdles of the cash economy by acknowledging that human time is the ultimate limited resource. Rule 2. The running tab, built entirely on trust. Before rural credit systems existed the way we know them now, general stores in Appalachian mountain towns operated on ledgers. A family could take flour, tools, or fabric, and the store owner would write down what was owed, not in a bank system, but in a physical book kept behind the counter. Payment came later, sometimes in cash when it was available, but very often in eggs, in canned goods, in a day's labor repairing the store's roof, in whatever the family actually had. This wasn't a formal loan. It was a relationship. The store owner knew the family, knew their land, knew their word was good. During the Great Depression, when actual currency became scarce across huge parts of rural America, these ledger systems kept entire towns functioning. Historians studying Depression-era rural economies have found that barter and credit ledgers like these were far more common in isolated communities than formal bank loans, simply because banks themselves were failing or inaccessible. Historical context: the country store was the central bank of the mountains. Ledgers often spanned decades. A storekeeper might carry a family's debt for 3 years, knowing that once the timber was cut or the ginseng was harvested, the account would be settled. During the 1930s, these ledgers became more complex, essentially becoming a local clearinghouse for goods. If the storekeeper didn't need your eggs but the blacksmith did, the storekeeper would credit your account and debit the blacksmith's, facilitating trade without a single cent moving. Modern application. In today's world, this translates to social capital. Building a reputation as someone whose word is their bond in a local community or a professional niche creates a safety net that no algorithm can provide. It's about returning to the idea of the handshake deal within trusted circles. Rule 3. Skill for skill trade, no cash ever changes hands. This is one of the clearest and most practical rules, and it still operates in Amish communities today. A farrier who shoes horses might take payment in milk, cheese, or firewood instead of money. A carpenter might build cabinets in exchange for a season's worth of vegetables from a neighbor's garden. This kind of direct trade, one skill for another need, means two families can both walk away with something valuable without a single dollar being involved. In a financial crash, when currency itself becomes unreliable or simply unavailable, this rule keeps an entire local economy moving. Nobody needs to wait for a bank to reopen. They just need a neighbor with a skill they don't have. Historical context. In the Blue Ridge Mountains, this was known as trading out. A midwife might deliver a child and receive a handcrafted cradle or a winter's supply of cured ham in return. This wasn't paying the midwife, it was a balancing of the scales. During the 1930s, doctors in rural areas often accepted chickens or bushels of apples as payment for house calls. This ensured that essential services never stopped, regardless of what was happening in Washington, D.C. Modern application: diversify your skills. In a digital world, we are often hyper-specialized. The lesson here is to acquire tangible skills: mechanical repair, gardening, basic medicine, or food preservation. These are universal currencies that have intrinsic value in any economy. Rule 4. Communal work events, known as frolics, turn survival into shared labor. Quilting bees, harvest frolics, corn huskings, and butchering days were structured community events where dozens of families combined labor for tasks too large for one household. This tradition is documented extensively in Appalachian folklife records, including the Foxfire Project, a long-running educational effort out of Rabun County, Georgia, where students interviewed elderly mountain residents starting in the 1960s and recorded their actual survival practices in detail. Foxfire's interviews describe hog killings where multiple families gathered to butcher and preserve meat together, splitting the yield so that no single household bore the full burden of the work or walked away without food for winter. These weren't charity events. They were built on an unspoken rule. You show up for your neighbor's frolic, and they show up for yours. Rule 5. Mutual aid replaces commercial insurance entirely. Amish communities famously do not purchase commercial insurance. And this is not a workaround. It is a deliberate rule rooted in their beliefs about self-sufficiency and community responsibility. When a barn burns down, when a family faces a massive medical bill, or when a crop fails, the community itself absorbs the cost. Donations are collected, labor is donated, and church-based aid funds cover what's needed. This system means that a single financial disaster affecting one family doesn't bankrupt them, because the risk is spread across dozens or hundreds of households. During actual national financial crises, this rule has kept Amish families remarkably insulated from the kind of one-event financial ruin that devastates households dependent entirely on commercial insurance and personal savings. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. Rule 6. Multi-generational land and resource sharing. In both Amish and Appalachian mountain communities, land has historically stayed within extended families across generations, with grandparents, parents, and adult children often living on the same property or adjacent plots. This isn't just tradition for its own sake. It means tools, livestock, seed stock, and buildings are shared resources rather than something each individual household has to buy separately. A tractor, a smokehouse, a root cellar, these get used by an entire extended family. When cash is scarce, this rule means fewer things need to be purchased in the first place because they're already collectively owned. Rule 7. Preserve first, trade the surplus. Appalachian mountain families historically ran their household economies around subsistence first. Canning vegetables, curing meat, drying fruit, and storing root vegetables in cellars meant that food security didn't depend on a grocery store or a paycheck. The Foxfire interviews are full of detailed, real descriptions of these preservation techniques passed down through generations specifically because families needed to survive winters and economic downturns without relying on outside markets. Only after a family's own needs were preserved and secured would the surplus, extra eggs, extra preserves, extra wool, get offered in trade to neighbors or at a local store. This rule prevented desperation trading, where a family gives away something they actually need just to get by in the moment. Rule 8. Reputation is collateral. In small, tight-knit communities where everyone knows everyone, a person's word functions like a credit score, except it can't be erased by a bank's algorithm or a market crash. If you don't repay a debt, whether in labor, goods, or trust, everyone in the community knows within days. This social accountability meant that barter and informal credit systems could operate for years without written contracts. Historians studying rural American economies during the Depression have pointed to this as one of the key reasons barter networks in small towns held together when formal financial systems collapsed. The currency wasn't gold or paper, it was your standing among people who weren't going anywhere. Rule 9. Local scrip and barter clubs as a last resort. During the Great Depression, when cash truly ran out in many communities, some towns and organizations created their own local scrip or barter exchange systems, essentially local currencies or trade credits that could be used within a defined community when federal currency was too scarce. These barter exchanges and local scrip systems are documented in Depression-era economic history as a genuine, widespread response to currency shortages, particularly in small towns cut off from urban banking centers. While not unique to the Amish or Appalachian regions specifically, mountain communities with existing barter traditions adapted to these systems especially well because the underlying practice of trading value without cash was already part of daily life. Rule 10. Slow, deliberate spending habits rooted in self-sufficiency, not scarcity panic. Perhaps the most important rule tying all of this together is a mindset rather than a single practice. Amish and Appalachian mountain communities historically built their economies around producing what they needed themselves first, and only using outside markets, cash, or credit for what truly couldn't be made or grown locally. This wasn't a reaction to a single financial crash. It was the everyday operating system of these communities. So when a crash did happen, when banks failed, when currency lost value, the disruption was far smaller because their economy was never fully dependent on that currency to begin with. What all 10 of these rules share is a simple truth. A financial crash is really a crash in trust, in banks, in currency, in institutions. Communities that built their systems around trust in each other instead of trust in a dollar bill had something that couldn't collapse overnight. That's not nostalgia. That's documented, recorded, real history, from Depression-era ledgers to Foxfire's interviews with people who lived it firsthand. And honestly, in a world where a single notification on your phone can tell you your savings just lost half their value, there's something worth learning from people who built an economy that never depended on that notification in the first place. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.